Hi everyone, and thank you for listening today. Today I'll be presenting on the book The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog by Dr. Bruce Perry and Maya Soslovitz. This book shares powerful stories of children who have experienced deep trauma and how healing is possible when we respond with empathy, structure, and love. About the authors. Dr. Perry is a child psychiatrist and trauma expert who has worked with severely traumatized children for decades. He is also the founder of the neurosequential model of therapeutics. His co-author, Maya Soslovitz, is a journalist who specializes in neuroscience and addiction. Together, they've created a book that's both deeply scientific and emotionally resonant. Today, I'm going to give a brief overview of the book, discuss its central themes, cover the case studies of Tina, Justin, Sandy, the Davidian children, and Connor, the boy who was raised as a dog, the one which the book is named after. I'll finish up with a personal reflection, application to practice, application to Carissa et al., questions, and final thoughts. The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog is structured around real case studies, stories of children who've lived through abuse, neglect, violence, and extreme environments. Each chapter is a window into how trauma affects the brain, behavior, and development. But more than that, it's a guide for how we can respond with compassion and understanding. As evidenced by the case studies in this book, Dr. Perry highlights healing through safety, connection, and repetition. Central themes. Some of the major themes that run throughout the book involve how trauma literally rewires the developing brain, the importance of early relationships, and the fact that healing takes time and repetition. Dr. Perry emphasizes that love and safety aren't just nice to have, they're biologically necessary for healthy development. Case studies. I picked 5 case studies from the book to discuss in depth. For each one, I will go over what happened, how Dr. Perry approached it, and what we learned from the case. Up first, our first case study is Tina. Tina was a toddler who suffered extreme early neglect. She wasn't held, she wasn't spoken to, she wasn't played with. Her brain had not received the stimulation needed to form typical emotional or social responses. Tina didn't cry, she didn't explore, and she barely interacted with the world around her. What her parents saw as misbehaving was not in fact misbehaving. Tina was simply underdeveloped because her environment had failed to activate her brain. As a toddler with almost no stimulation, Tina's brain development had stalled. Dr. Perry approached it by using sensory-rich, nurturing environments to engage the underdeveloped parts of Tina's brain. He emphasized rhythmic, repetitive activities like rocking, singing, and soft touch. Tina's development was ultimately approached like that of a much younger child, focusing on building basic emotional regulation and trust. Over time, Tina began to respond to connection and started to build emotional engagement. What we learned from Tina's case is that love and connection are as essential as food and water for a child's brain to grow and can significantly impact brain development. We also learned that loving interaction is necessary for brain development and that neglect can be just as damaging, if not more, than abuse, especially in early childhood. The absence of stimulation during critical brain development windows can lead to deep and emotional cognitive delays. Children like Tina don't need discipline. They need to feel safe, seen, and soothed. Developmental repair is possible when caregivers meet children where they are, not where we think they should be. Our second case study is Justin. What happened? Justin was a 4-year-old boy who had experienced multiple early caregiver changes and traumatic events. On the surface, he appeared charming and well-behaved, but really, he wasn't able to form authentic emotional connections with others. Instead, his affection was merely performative and manipulative, learned survival strategies, not genuine relational bonds. Justin had never experienced consistent, safe attachment, and his emotional development had been disrupted by instability and fear. Dr. Perry's approach. For Justin, Dr. Perry emphasized building safe, consistent relationships over time. Caregivers were trained to respond calmly, predictably, and with empathy, even when Justin rejected affection. He was given structure, nurturance, and the space to slowly experience trust, not force it. Justin's treatment was focused on helping him feel emotionally regulated and safe so that he could eventually learn real attachment. What we learned. This case shows how attachment issues stem from relational wounds, not bad behavior. Children with disruptive attachments may mimic affection without real emotional bonds. Justin's case is also further evidence that attachment disorders stem from a lack of early love and stability. Our next case study is Sandy. What happened? Sandy was a 7-year-old girl who had been in multiple foster placements after experiencing trauma in her biological home. She frequently had tantrums, refused to follow instructions, and resisted comfort. Her behavior was described as defiant, controlling, and emotionally explosive. Many adults in her life also viewed her as manipulative or attention-seeking, which only led to harsher discipline and further rejection, creating a vicious cycle. But Sandy's outbursts were really trauma responses. Underneath the behavior was a scared child who had learned that trusting adults only led to more pain. Children in foster care often show behaviors that reflect deep fear and loss, not disobedience. So what looked like defiance was really just a child trying to protect herself from being hurt again. Her behavior wasn't personal, it was protective. And until someone understood that, Sandy stayed stuck in survival mode. Luckily, Dr. Perry came along. Dr. Perry recognized that Sandy didn't need more consequences, she needed safety and regulation. Dr. Perry worked with Sandy's foster parents to provide a calm, predictable environment, reducing the chaos that triggered her. He taught her caregivers to respond with emotional attunement and patience, not punishment. Sandy's healing process focused on rebuilding trust through routines, gentle caregiving, and safe relationships. Instead of trying to make her obey, adults began meeting her underlying emotional needs. What we learned. Sandy's story reminds us that trauma doesn't always look like sadness. It often shows up as rage, resistance, or withdrawal. And when we punish those behaviors without really understanding them, we reinforce the very wounds that caused them. Healing happens in relationships where kids are allowed to be messy, scared, and real without being rejected. Sandy didn't need perfection. She just needed someone who stayed. Some of the key things that we learned from Sandy's case, what we call bad behavior in traumatized children, is actually a survival strategy. Caregivers must be trained and supported, not blamed, so they can respond with patience, not frustration. Trauma doesn't just affect a child's mood, it affects how they interpret the world. Healing isn't about obedience, it's about trust, connection, and helping the child feel safe in their own skin. Sandy teaches us that consistency, emotional safety, and relational attunement are the foundation of healing. The next case study is the Davidian children. What happened? In 1993, the Branch Davidian compound near Waco, Texas, was raided after a 51-day standoff with federal agents that ended in a tragic siege and fire. Over 20 children had been living inside, exposed to apocalyptic beliefs, social isolation, and authoritarian control. They were taught to distrust the outside world and obey without question. Many lost parents in the fire, emerging into a world they'd been told was evil. They had been taught that outsiders were enemies, and many still clung tight to their teachings after rescue. They had been isolated from all outside influence. Some of the parents even told their kids as they were being separated that these are the people who will kill us. These children were not just grieving, they were confused, disoriented, and still loyal to their abuser. They had no framework for trust, safety, or truth outside of the cult's teachings. Dr. Perry's approach. Dr. Perry's genius in this case was knowing that healing had to come before truth. He didn't try to correct the kids. He knew that if they didn't feel safe, they couldn't process logic or facts. So he focused on their nervous systems first, giving them calm, gentle, and predictable care. Once the children felt safe enough, they could begin to reflect. Truth isn't absorbed under stress. It's received when a child is regulated and connected. Dr. Perry worked with all the child survivors immediately following the siege, even living with them. He focused first on creating safety and predictability in their environment. Dr. Perry and his team did not confront or argue with the children's beliefs, recognizing that this would only increase the fear and resistance and further alienate them. Instead, Dr. Perry prioritized emotional regulation and safety, creating routines, stability, and calm caregivers. He used play, storytelling, and consistent caregiving to slowly rebuild the children's ability to trust and make them feel safe and secure. Caregivers validated the children's grief and confusion without pushing them to snap out of it. Slowly, the team introduced corrective emotional experiences, showing the children what safe adults looked and felt like. Rather than lecture or debate, they allowed the children's own emotional recovery to lead the process of cognitive change. Over time, truth became accessible through trust, not through force or debate. What we learned. This case is a reminder that healing isn't just about what we teach, it's about how we relate. These children had been taught to fear outsiders, but Dr. Perry didn't try to convince them otherwise. He simply became someone safe. Eventually, the need to believe in their cult teachings faded, not because of arguments, but because trust made space for a new reality. That's the power of trauma-informed care. It meets kids exactly where they are and walks with them out of the darkness. Here are some of our key takeaways from this case. Children raised in cults or ideological abuse can recover, but only through relational safety and patience. Truth can't be forced. Emotional safety must come before cognitive change. These children weren't brainwashed robots. They were emotionally intelligent kids trying to survive confusing, abusive systems. Healing involves giving space for grief, identity loss, and the slow rebuilding of trust. This case reminds us, love is more powerful than control, and connection is the path out of fear. Our last case study for today is Connor, the boy who was raised as a dog. Connor's story is the most well-known from the book. It's even in the title. After Connor's primary caregiver passed away, he was left with a severely overwhelmed adult who did not know how to meet his needs. Rather than being treated like a child, Connor was confined to a dog crate and ate out of a dog bowl. He wasn't spoken to, held, or taught how to interact. He was alive but deeply isolated, emotionally and developmentally. His brain missed key stages of growth. And yet, even in this dehumanizing situation, Connor's ability to form bonds hadn't completely disappeared. That's what makes his story both heartbreaking and hopeful. When Dr. Perry met Connor, he didn't treat him based on his age. He met him where he was emotionally. He recognized that Connor's behaviors weren't, quote, wrong. They were adaptive responses to a world that hadn't offered him safety or love. Connor's therapy was built around structure, warmth, and relational repetition. He was slowly introduced to routines, peer play, and meaningful human interaction. Instead of forcing him to act like a typical child, Dr. Perry gave Connor space to grow into being a child at his own pace in an environment that felt safe. This approach emphasized that developmental trauma needs developmental healing. Connor's story teaches us that no child is too far gone. His behavior may have seemed animal-like, but it was actually a survival strategy in an inhuman environment. This reminds us not to judge children by their most extreme behaviors, but to look deeper with curiosity and compassion. Connor didn't need punishment. He needed someone to believe he was worth healing. Most of all, he needed someone willing to walk slowly beside him, meeting his needs again and again until trust could grow. It's a reminder that healing isn't magic, it's relational, and it's possible, even when it seems impossible. Reflection. Reading this book was emotionally intense but incredibly eye-opening. It reshaped the way I view children's behavior. I was deeply moved by the resilience shown in each and every case. I found myself reflecting not just on children I might work with, but on how often we overlook the deeper roots of behavior. What struck me most was how trauma hides in plain sight. So many of the kids were labeled bad or manipulative when really they were just scared, hurting, and traumatized. I was also surprised by the power of repetition and rhythm in healing. That something as simple as rocking or drumming could help regulate the brain that was both humbling and hopeful. This book reshaped the way I think about discipline, trust, and emotional safety. I now believe that connection must come before correction. Cress, Palo, and Stargell would actually be a good accompanying text for the boy who was raised as a dog, as their approaches to counseling children interlock in many ways, listed here, just in case you want to write it down. Overall, both texts emphasize that children can't be reached through logic or reasoning until they feel safe. They also agree that therapy must be developmentally appropriate, relational, and consistent. What Perry shows us through real-life stories, Cress et al. Support with clinical frameworks. The importance that children need relationships more than they need interventions. Healing doesn't begin with what we do to kids, it begins with how we are with them. More specifically, Perry and Cress et al. Agree on trauma-informed counseling. Perry and Cress et al. Both support trauma-informed counseling. Brown et al., 2025 also. Both Perry and Cress et al. Agree trauma changes how children process the world, and we must change how we interact with them in response. Their shared view is that the therapeutic goal isn't just behavioral change. It's emotional, safety, nervous system regulation, and trust. Brown et al. Joins Perry and Cress et al. In their support of grounding therapeutic work in relational presence rather than interventions. They also emphasize co regulation, achieving regulation within relational attunement. Lastly, reinforcing that emotional safety and trust are not side effects, but the mechanism of healing. Whether through neuroscience like Perry or counseling models like Kress et al., both advocate for approaching children with gentleness, curiosity, and patience. Kress et al. And Perry also both support the use of developmentally appropriate interventions. Perry uses brain-based, age-appropriate methods, just like Kress et al., who emphasize meeting the child where they are. They both also acknowledge the importance and effect of safe, predictable relationships on development. Kress et al. Highlight the therapeutic relationship as a key factor. Perry shows that relational safety is what ultimately heals trauma. Behavior as communication. Both texts assert that children's actions and what may be seen as misbehavior is often a reflection of unmet needs and past traumatic wounds. Lastly, Perry and Kress et al. Both recognize the power of repetition and structure. Perry uses rhythm, routine, and structure to promote regulation, which aligns with Kress et al.'s and Ludi, Dobson, and Perry's 2010 emphasis on consistent structure and boundaries. Application to practice. This book has real implications. When we work with children, whether in schools, therapy, foster care, or even in churches, we need to create environments that are predictable, nurturing, and trauma-informed. Dr. Perry's work shows us that how we show up matters more than what we say. Whether in counseling, education, foster care, or parenting, we need to stop seeing trauma-informed care as a luxury. It is a necessity. Practically, this means creating calm, predictable environments where children feel seen, soothed, and safe. We must train ourselves and others to interpret behavior through a trauma lens. Ask not what's wrong with this child, but what happened to this child. Use regulation before reasoning. Children in distress can't access logic until they feel safe emotionally. Building trust is not a one-time event. It is a daily, sometimes hourly choice to show up consistently and kindly. Questions. One of the questions I had while reading this was, how do we scale this kind of individualized care in systems that are overloaded and under-resourced? I also wondered about long-term follow-up. What happened to these children 10 or 20 years later? For instance, did Sandy have a happy, healthy childhood once her caregivers knew how to meet her needs? Did Justin make friends, or is he married? Whatever happened to the Davidian children? Also, some stories felt rushed or incomplete, and I found myself wanting more detail about the aftermath and recovery process. Finally, while the book is obviously powerful, it can be also emotionally overwhelming, understandably. It would have been helpful to have more guidance for readers working through their own trauma responses. If I could summarize this book in one phrase, it would be, no child is too damaged to heal if they are met with compassion. Dr. Perry shows us that even in the most extreme situations, healing is possible when we prioritize relationships over rules, safety over structure, and love over fear. The stories in this book are painful, but they also spark hope. They remind us that change doesn't start with programs, it starts with people. As future professionals, caregivers, or simply humans, we carry the power to be safe, consistent, healing presences in someone's life. That is both a responsibility and a gift. Thank you for listening today. It's been a pleasure to discuss such an important and special book, and I hope that you'll feel the same way. Here are my references.